Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And welcome to all those who are still logging on. It's 6:01 here, so we're going to go ahead and get started with a little housekeeping. My name is Nathan Lott, and I work for the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans. If you're with us, you may know PRC from our social media presence. You may have heard about this through our email list, and I hope that you're a member. But if you're not, we'd love to have you join the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans. You can do that on our website, prcno.org. And as a member, you will receive our almost monthly, 10 times a year, I think, magazine, Preservation in Print. And you also will receive access to certain special events. And while you're at prcno.org, you can buy gifts like Building on the Past, Saving Historic New Orleans, our most recently published book about the impact that building reuse and historic preservation have had on our beloved city. It still makes a great Mother's Day gift if you haven't gotten one. You'll have to drop by the office tomorrow to pick it up, but if you're in town, you can do that. I also want to tell you about one more exciting event that we have underway. Normally in April or May, we have a fundraiser formerly called the Julia Jump, and we recently rechristened that to the Revival Gala because we're all about revival of historic architecture and buildings for new purposes and new people to give them new life. But this year we could not have a Revival Gala, so instead we're having a Revival Gala Vant, which is a clever title for a fun run. And if you register for this, prcno.org, you get a special guide with different routes and information about historic buildings you'll find along those different routes, including one for families. And you get a t-shirt too. Preservation is a marathon, not a sprint, it says. So you've still got a month left to do that. May is Preservation Month, so it's a great time to support PRC by signing up for the Revival Gala event and exploring more of our city on foot or on bike or even on kayak if you want to. All right, with that out of the way, I'll now let you know that we'll be taking questions from the audience through the course of the presentation and probably saving many of them for the end. So if you are able to use the Q&A function for questions, that helps me to be able to keep track of them and make sure that we can get to as many of them as possible. I want to thank the people who helped make this happen tonight, and Laurel Fay, who was our intern from the Tulane Masters of Preservation Studies, was instrumental in putting all this together. Thank you, Laurel. And my colleague, Danielle Watson, who is our tech whiz behind the scenes, and also our DJ tonight, if you tuned in a few minutes early. As always, thank you, Danielle, for making this work and go so smoothly. And now, I want to thank most of all our special guest, Mr. John Campo, who is an architect. He was registered in the state of Louisiana, licensed in 1985, and he started his own firm at that time and has been doing historic preservation work really from the beginning, and has evolved from being just the architect to actually taking on the historic tax credit portion, getting buildings listed on the National Register and eligible for tax credits, and shepherding them through that process, and increasingly even the development side, to being a fully integrated company that is a co-investor in some of their projects, which gives them a unique seat at the table. And they use that seat at the table to advocate for the most sensitive treatment of these historic buildings and the safeguarding of these special places. So I'm really excited by the opportunity to have a conversation with John about what historic preservation and the tools of contemporary preservation have meant for his development as an architect and as a principal of his own firm. And also, I think he's going to touch on some of our shared interest in continuing to grow those programs that make possible historic preservation in our city and have made our city such a leader. I met John through our joint work on Preservation Advocacy Week recently. And I know that we share a passion for communicating with policymakers all of the real good that comes from state and federal preservation incentives and programs, and the jobs that are created, the communities that benefit, and places that are saved. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say. And without further ado, John, welcome.
Thank you, Nathan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I've enjoyed working with you on some of the legislative issues at the federal level, and I'm excited to be here tonight. We're going to cover a fair amount of ground that kind of has ebbs and flows that touch on hospitality, architecture, interior design, green buildings being tax credit projects, as well as the title, which is businesses built on a sense of place, and what that message has to discuss how guests perceive and enjoy historic hospitality in New Orleans. Not that they don't enjoy the new buildings, but we know from our own experience that these guests, they feel New Orleans when they're in these historic hotels. So we'll cover quite a bit of ground there, and please, as we go through it, if you have any questions, just you're free to interrupt. So
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So right now on the screen, you can see quite a body of our work. At the top are a number of historic properties across the country that we've worked on, and as well some of the interiors on the bottom of the screen. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about New Orleans and hospitality history. As we know, New Orleans, it's been a destination for 300 years for folks that are coming to a city to enjoy its culture, its food, its music, and of course, its historic architecture. So what we have here is the first St. Charles Hotel, the second and the third. Of course, fire was its enemy, but you can see the grandeur of this particular hotel, as well as the Hotel Monteleone, the Denishaw Hotel, which is the Le Pavillon, and the Roosevelt hotels. And we're bringing these slides up to say, look, people at that point in time, they were coming here to experience, all of the sensory notions that I had mentioned a minute ago, but also these hotels, some of them have survived, and they are still providing a guest experience.
That's really neat. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hotel Monteleone, I mean, it's carousel is world renowned. People come here and utilize that facility and have a enjoyable cocktail or two. Le Pavillon has been renovated, just as the Roosevelt, which is now the Waldorf Astoria, and of course the Bourbon Orleans. And the reason I have this particular slide up here is those were built as hotels and have not gone through any other adaptive reuse. And in contrast, we've got some projects that are shown on the bottom that Factors Row, which is a project that's done by one of our favorites, Traplin Pier. That's an example of a historic building that was gone through adaptive reuse, and it was a tax credit project. And then, of course, the Ace Hotel, which has won many awards. And one of the best attributes, I think, of the Ace Hotel and what SQ Dumez and Ripple did here was they had to merge new construction with historic, and that's a feat among by itself, just to go through the review and approval process to do that. And so there's, these projects, they're complex enough with respect to the approval of the local, state, and federal folks, but when there's another layer that's added to it of new construction, then it's another Rubik's Cube. The other two projects are examples of some of our work. One is the Interstate Electric Company building that we converted into a Fairfield Inn and Suites, and the other project is an AC hotel that was the first AC by Marriott in the United States. We actually we were running a race with another project. I think it was in Kansas City, but it was neck and neck. But we were very fortunate to prevail, and this was the first project, the AC, that opened in New Orleans. Our studio director, Miriam Salas, on this project actually assisted Marriott in developing the brand standards for the AC.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so some of our work, in fact, this particular picture is what is shown if you're in an immersion at Marriott International Headquarters, particularly because of its lighting. The lighting designers did a great job, as well as some of the work with respect to the canopy. So again, these are examples. The difference between the two are buildings that were built as hotels, and then through historic tax credits, the adaptive reuse of other structures. So yeah, so a lot of folks ask me, it's like, okay, John, what is it that's different about your firm than other architectural firms? And it's kind of easy to have that elevator speech, because what we do is we bring the entire myriad of services in total to our clients. It's the architecture, it's the interior design, it's the historic tax credit portion, so that we're at one point of contact where we actually have full-time general counsel that serves as special tax credit counsel for our project. So that is markedly different than some of our competitors. What our clients tell us is we're not the lowest cost provider, and they say we regard and consider the fees that we pay your firm an investment with a very high rate of return. And that's probably the best compliment that an architect can get, right? And what they mean by that is pretty simple. They invested in our work, and particularly with respect to the historic tax credits, we're able to monetize them and bring quite a bit of equity to the deal. So that's an example of what differentiates us.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you guys do interior design alongside architecture, and I'm just thinking about in the hospitality space, particularly, you know, the interior design of a room, if that's where you're staying and sleeping and spending the night, you know, it has a real important part of the guest experience. You know, it's you know, very different than designing a residential apartment where you're, you know, gonna let the resident fill up the rooms with their own furniture. But do you find that it's important to have the interior design speak to the architectural setting?
Absolutely. Mary Gilmore is our director of interior design. She's also a licensed architect. That's a rare find to have both of those professions and licenses in one person. And the interior design aspects, I like to talk about and Stephen Bingler kind of mentioned, but not kind of, he mentioned this about the Jack's Brewery, and we'll get to that later on in the presentation, but creating a line of demarcation in time between what is historic and historic character defining elements that certainly we're there to preserve. But in stark contrast to that is some of the very slick contemporary finishes that Mary and our interiors group can come up with that clearly mark that difference in time. And quite frankly, it's a great guest experience, because as they're going through, you know, they're viewing the building from the exterior and they're getting that experience. And then as they move into the building, there is a lot of the existing historic fabric that is there, and it coexists with some of the contemporary work. Many times, particularly on the AC hotels, by the time you get to the guest room, you are in a contemporary setting. And the exterior wall, which is historic, is the contrast. But yes, the interior design is, it's a very important part of the process. Having interior designers that understand the standards for rehabilitation, and as they're designing, you know, knowing that, for instance, you know, the drapery pocket needs to be in such a fashion that it's not butting up against the head of the window. There are a lot of interior designers that we work with that aren't in-house. They just don't know that. And, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but it places a little bit more burden on us to have to educate them along the way. Well, it's a rare moment now for us not to be the interior designer too.
Well, and yeah, you just sort of made me think of something that not everybody watching might know, which is that when you use historic tax credits, that's an incentive program offered by, in our case, in Louisiana, the state has a companion program for the federal government, but anywhere in the country from the federal government. And it's the one kind of preservation tool that gets at the interior of a building. You know, if you own a building, a city somewhere like New Orleans could have a historic district, like we have the Vieux-Carré Commission and the Historic District Landmarks Commission. There could be a preservation commission, but generally those local regulations only govern the outside of the building. But if you want to use historic tax credits, those incentives can sometimes enable the Park Service to tell you, hey, you got to keep this extra wide hallway in the old school building, for example, because that's part of, you know, the way it was designed. You can't rearrange the walls, or, you know, and it'll be different in particular for each building. But, you know, there must be cases, John, where, you know, the Park Service says, no, you can't do that. You got to do this in terms of interior features. And so having a designer who is adept at working around that or working with that seems like it might be really important.
Well, Miriam Salas asked me for 15 years to please have interior design in-house. And I resisted until I guess about 6 years ago. And it was the best decision that I could have made. And I admit she was right, because, you know, our office is an open setting and our interior designers sit adjacent to the architects. So the coordination aspect is much easier. And you're right, those restrictions, those standards, if you don't know them inside and out, then you're going to have a problem with your part two. The part two is going to be fraught with conditions. It'll be worthless. So those are things that I think we've made some good business decisions on, and it makes it easier for clients to hire us because they know that they don't have to manage that process. They can go do other projects. We free them up to go do more projects. So real quick, I'd like to talk about, for the folks that are on this podcast, you know, tax credits, historic tax credits are not a deduction. They're actually a dollar for dollar credit that is a below the line. So if one owes $1,000 or $100,000 in federal historic tax credits, and they have are in taxes, then these credits would dollar for dollar reduce that. More importantly, these tax credits can be converted to cash. And so that's really another area that, without that, these hotels and other historic projects, they wouldn't exist. I mean, the historic tax credits at the state and federal level, they give enough incentive for an owner to take more risk. And for instance, in Louisiana, we have a 20% matching on the federal side. And what we do is design and navigate through the myriad of approvals at the local, state, and federal level. But also, we solicit investors that we worked with for 15, 20 years who will compete to give us the best offering in terms of cents on the dollar. So those dollars are used as equity in the project on the front end via a bridge loan. And I'm kind of getting in the weeds a little bit, but you know, typically tax credits, you don't benefit from them until the end of the project, when the project is finished, and then the most of the federal and all of the state tax credits are then able to be monetized. A bridge loan is a facility where you have a lender that will lend 90% of the total federal and state historic tax credits on the front side of the project, and that money is used as equity. And so I won't go much deeper than that, but suffice it to say that money at the front end of the project instead of the partners having to come out of their pocket for 35% of the total project, many times it's 30% monetized historic tax credit cash, 5 to 10% of money out of pocket. And that's what makes these projects actually become a reality. So I know that's a little bit deep, but that's what we do.
We got in the Q&A about that. So, so I think you hit that question about monetizing. Yeah, the state credit is transferable, which means that if John does a project, I could buy the credit from him and I don't have to have a stake in the project. The federal is not transferable, so I got to actually be a co-investor with John, at least until I redeem my credits, and then I can walk away.
Yeah, actually, it's a 5-year. You're a partner with the investor for 5 years, and once the recapture period burns off, it reverts back 100% to the original developer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have a related question about the sort of the value of those tax credits. So if a developer is converting those tax credits into cash, is it 80 cents on the dollar, 90 cents on the dollar, 70 cents on the dollar?
It depends. Before there have been a lot of changes in federal historic tax credit law, and without boring everyone with that, suffice it to say that the equation for evaluating the best deal in the past had very few variables. That's not the case anymore. Now there are a lot more variables to the equation. So the short answer is the federal tax credits right now are hovering around 85 cents, 82 to 85. If someone is paying 100 cents on the dollar, that's generally a large bank, then you're not going to get the benefit of their cash for a very long time. So that's the time value of money right there. At the state level, the state, we have a project right now. We just got an offer at 93 cents, which is a very strong offer on a state historic tax credit. So
yeah.
Our clients, Nathan, ask us at the very beginning 2 questions. How much are we going to get, and how quickly are we going to get it? That's always the 2 questions. So what we tell them is via the bridge loan, we can get you the money quicker. If you take the tax credit and just use a 65% margin, where 65 cents on the dollar, that's about where you're going to end up in cash. So that's a very long answer to, if you have $1 million in tax credits, $650,000 is what one could expect as a net cash for them to invest into the project.
On the front end, yeah.
On the front end via a bridge loan. That's correct.
Okay, that's great. So let's get up out of the weeds and look at some more pretty pictures, John.
Okay. So this is a map, and the reason we have it up here is it shows that the preponderance of our work is in the downtown area of New Orleans. We have some work that has been done in the warehouse district. Item number 17 is not historic. That's a new build that is a very large dual branded hotel across the street from the convention center. But by and large, our work is grouped in the CBD and in the French Quarter. We didn't realize we had done this many projects until our firm was interviewed for the the World War II Museum Hotel. And I said, hey, why don't we show our experience locally? And when this popped up, we suddenly realized that we had 17 hospitality projects over the course of 36 years in our portfolio. So of these projects, 13 projects are from out-of-state clients. And I bring that up because we see ourselves as stewards of the city, trying to enhance and bring as much investment as we can into the city of New Orleans. And it's reciprocal. I mean, look, New Orleans has been good to me and my firm. It was, the Jack's Brewery was the genesis of my career in historic architecture, and we export that, right? But vice versa is our firm works very hard with our national clients to say, look, we'll even help you find sites. And so of those 13 hotels, we calculated that's about $500 million worth of investment from out of state investors. And that's just their first investment. That doesn't count the decades of property taxes, food and beverage revenue, jobs that these investors have brought into the city. So yeah, this map is kind of a Campo commercial about what we've done in the past, but more importantly, I'm very proud of what we've been able to do for the city of New Orleans and revitalizing a lot of these historic buildings.
That's great.
Next. All right, so Stephen Bingler last night talked a little bit about our early years in the Jack's Brewery, and it brings back a lot of fond memories. I was dating my wife at the time, and we got married 3 months before the Jack's Brewery opened. So that was a very dear memory, but the photo on the left brought back some different memories. And I can remember standing on Decatur Street and looking at how dismal it was. I mean, that picture is very accurate in terms of, just a building that had been vacant for years, but it wasn't just the Jack's Brewery. If you look down Decatur Street, there were a lot of buildings that had been boarded up, and what was there, it smelled of stale beer, and it just wasn't a pretty sight. So I think that, I know that these types of projects, they become the catalyst for urban revitalization. And it takes something of this scale to really get it started. But when I think back of where we were then and everything that has happened as a result of phase 1, 2, and 3 of the Jack's Brewery, it represents a great example of urban revitalization, including, Waldenberg Park and the Aquarium of the Americas, and you just continue going upriver all the way to the Audubon Zoo. I'd like to think that this kind of started that.
Well, and certainly, going downriver, Crescent Park, the post-Katrina revitalization. Yeah. It seems like this is one of the earliest kind of re-engagements with the riverfront, besides maybe the moonwalk. But this sort of invites people to go up there on the levee and take a picture of St. Louis Cathedral and see the river and re-engage with it. So, it's very different to do that alongside the renovated Jack's Brewery than it would have been, in 1970.
Well, it also is, I listened to what Stephen was discussing last night about the difference of opinions of the Vieux-Carré Commission and the National Park Service, and how one side of the building is that contemporary glass and the other side is a pretty close replication of the historic facade. And, I didn't realize it until he was speaking. I said, that's exactly what I mentioned earlier about that contrast, that clear line of demarcation in time. And I think that the brewery is a great example of that. There's another thing that Stephen didn't mention that I wanted to bring up, and that is when he was looking at these different phases, he was very sensitive to the view corridors. Now, in New Orleans, we have a levee. A project that I'll show you later is in Savannah. It doesn't have a levee. You've got direct visual access to the river, but Stephen designed these buildings. Certainly this was there, but he gave them some space so that the space between the building was as important as the building itself. So when you walk up these steps and you reach that landing, you're now above the levee and you're looking at the river. And it was his way of, getting one to experience the Mississippi River, because you just don't get that many shots at it. You can be real close to it, but that levee is going to block it. So I kudos to him. Look, I owe a debt of gratitude to him, because he could have picked a lot of architects in New Orleans in 1983 to participate. And all of a sudden, here he is with a group of mid 20-year-old architects doing I think it was $14 million in 1983 dollars. So thank you, Stephen. All right, so let's take a look at some other. All right, this project is the Embassy Suites Lofts, and I have it up here for a couple of reasons. One, it was my first real estate development project, so I had two partners that were the contractors. It was Jack Donahue and Bob Fabric, Donahue Fabric Contractors, and a client out of Dallas that had hired us to renovate and expand the Embassy Suites that you see in the left corner of the picture there. That client expressed to me that he wanted to have more hotel rooms in New Orleans, find him a hotel that he could buy. So I was literally walking down the street from a site visit, and this building it had no windows. It was pretty beaten up, and there was a sign that had been on it so long, the for sale sign, it had faded. So I was barely able to read the numbers, but when I looked up, it's like, well, here's his freestanding addition. Well, little did I know that as a REIT, as a hospitality REIT, they can't take development risks. And so we decided, Donahue Fabric and Campo decided to approach that owner and do a turnkey hotel project. So it hit on all cylinders. Client was ecstatic. We had a great time developing this project. But if you look at the upper left-hand corner in the guest room, this is an example of the luxury that one gets when he is an owner or a partner. The hotel, the windows were deteriorated beyond repair. And we had a lot of options for replacing those windows. And as you know, NPS and SHPO will accept something that is in kind or like kind. We made a conscious decision to spend $200,000 of our own money. We took it out of our profit to really go and do it right. And so those are T-frame steel putty glaze windows that really make the difference in the room. When you look at those large industrial windows versus what would have been aluminum, it made all the difference in the world. And that's just one of the things that I love about advancing my career into more partnerships and ownerships where we've got that kind of control and can further be stewards of these historic buildings. Because I can tell you, most of my clients wouldn't have taken that $200,000 out of their pocket to do it. So again, another example of, if you look at the lower left-hand corner, we like to try and repurpose or use historic elements of the building. This building has exposed steel, although it's a 10-story building. That's where we used our architectural technical skills to get a variance from the fire marshal because we were able to convince them that the steel was so thick that under the worst of fires, it could withstand more than 2 hours. We had a psychometric chart that showed that this steel would stand up to 4 hours of direct heat. So we got a variance to expose the steel. The arch steel those are components from the catwalk that were on the upper floors. So we took those elements and we used them to create that arcade from the lobby to the meeting rooms. So that's a couple of points on that particular project.
Yeah, those are great examples of how sort of like when you've got some skin in the game, so to speak, you also have that enhanced level of control and decision making. And then at the end of the day, it's your name attached to the product and to the results. So you don't have the client value engineering out your design skills, but you have the luxury of saying, no, we're going to do this, even if it does cost a little bit more. And then, your name is on it and you can show what the results were worth to the next client or to the next partner.
Well, Nathan, I consider it a responsibility. If we're going to walk the walk and talk the talk, that's just how we have to approach these projects. We don't have to wring every single penny out of it. There's enough money to be made where I guess you could say we kind of get our cake and eat it too, but to ignore something like that, that's just not the way we practice. It's not part of Campo's culture. And, you know, we've done that on a number of projects where there's enough money to be made. So one of the other things that was fascinating about this particular building is this was essentially a sugar refinery. And the wagons that had the sugar cane that they would load on the river would come here, and at the very top there was a boom that stuck out of the building, and they would take the sugar cane and it would go to the top of the building.
Oh, wow.
And as it moved down the building, it became refined. There was the floor that had the catwalks had these very big boiling pots where they boiled the sugar cane. And so
Wow.
that's why the structure was so heavy. So, and then some of the sugar got on the brick walls and it crystallized. And so we left that. We left
Oh,
it
wow.
because it gave it that grit. People that went to this particular project, they knew they were in New Orleans and they had that grit, that feel for it. By the time it got to the bottom of the building, it was sugar. It was packaged sugar. Next. This was originally a project that was a country inn and suites. While it looked nothing like a country inn and suites, that was the flag. It was a very challenging but fun project. 7 buildings in a U-shaped configuration. From a guest experience, there are 17 different room types here. And many of our clients loved to stay at this hotel because they said, you know, every time I come here, I ask for a different room. And so they could have 17 visits to this hotel and get an experience from the Clarion Herald Press building to one of the other tobacco warehouses that fronted Magazine Street. So back to the theme of this presentation is, you know, that is good business. And guess what? This was the most profitable country inn and suites hotel in a chain of 400, 10 years running. So, you know, the history sells, you know, all of that money that these clients were spending and all of the tax credits that were there to help them level the playing field, it pays off. You know,
and in this case, did you have different floor-to-floor heights to work around as you stitched those buildings together?
We have an elevator in the rear that goes up a half a floor at a time. It's got entrances. To meet the ADA, you had to get on one side and get out on the other. So it goes up a half a floor at a time. So yes, many challenges. In the lower left-hand side, you'll see exposed heavy timber. Part of the program required suites. The buildings, other than this part of the U-shaped configuration, there were no 2 buildings that were adjacent. So this was the only one that had the depth to put the suites, but on the opposite side is a 4-hour rated wall that's on the property line. And so the challenge here was to get an approval to cut a hole in the building and remove some of the beams to get borrowed light into the suites. And that was an arm wrestling contest that went on for about 4 months. And so in order to do that, we had to find some other chips to trade, so to speak. And one of them is the elevator equipment on the old freight elevator is now featured in the lobby, and it's part of a educational experience. These buildings all have stories to tell, and so it's a point of interest for guests. So that's a great example of the negotiation process that happens on these projects.
Yeah, we had a question about resolving the conflicts between permitting agencies and, you know, Park Service versus fire marshals and such as that. So thanks for touching on that. Yeah.
Well, you know, you mentioned fire marshal. Our technical skills as architects and understanding not just the face of what's written in NFPA 101 or IBC or ADA, that's one level of expertise. For these types of projects, not only do you need to know the face, you know, on its face, but the intent with which it was written, because every one of these projects require variances and waivers, where on one end of the spectrum, SHPO and NPS is saying, well, you know, if you want your tax credits, You need to be able to create or maintain this historic fabric. And on the other end of the spectrum are the codes that say, well, no, 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 that heavy timber that you're looking at right there, that needs to be 2-hour rated. So what we do in essence is we write our own codes. We create an equivalent degree of safety via, you can look in that, there's a smoke removal system and an enhanced sprinkler system in this building that allowed us to get the variance from the state fire marshal to expose material that should have been 2-hour rated. And that took many years of practice to get to the level where we're writing our own codes.
Wow.
Next. All right. Everybody remembers this project. This is the old Lofts Center. It's got a morbid history. As you can see, that's the fire. The reason we actually, well, the reason we're showing this is twofold. One, this is a mid-century modern building, and we're seeing more and more of our work trend towards that because there's a lot more of them around. I mean, 1971 buildings are now 50 years old. But more importantly, to get this building listed individually, the fire created a part of NFPA 101, which mandated high-rise buildings be sprinkled. And based on that event and the result of that event, that was what the NPS gave the individual listing on. So as morbid as that is, that's how the building got listed. It was vacant. I don't know, that building was vacant for 25 years or more. And we were fortunate enough to obtain this commission. We were not the tax credit consultant on this, so I don't want to take credit for something that's not mine, but that is how the individual listing evolved, and that is what sprung the project financially. This is
fascinating.
Everyone, you know what, Nathan, I'm so passionate about this work. I'm never going to retire. And everybody in my firm knows it, and my wife knows it too. It's just exciting to be able every time to have a different set of challenges, a different story to tell, and the results being financial rewards. You can see that this is a really cool looking project. It's very sleek. It's got a rooftop bar that I understand is very active. It's got views, 360-degree views of the city. But as a mid-century modern building, this was a real success story.
And given the fire damage, did you have to kind of go back and essentially replace a lot of what had been there that was damaged by fire, or did you have more of a blank slate?
It was quasi-blank slate. What we encountered, again, you get into a building where all of the interiors are gutted and most of the windows are out. It's like, well, hell, we can see everything here. There are not going to be any surprises. The thickness of the slab varied from 2.5 inches to 4.5 inches. And so that created a 2-hour separation problem. And we only learned that once they started construction and coring it. You really couldn't see it. So all of the burnt material was gone, but that's a great example of, you never know what you're going to run into with these buildings. So that and the stairs were too close together to meet current codes. And let's see, it was Amy Finkler, who is the project manager on this project with our company. And she came up with a solution where the 2-hour rated stair towers were enhanced to 3 hours. And by doing that, we didn't have to cut another hole and move a stair 10 feet. So that would have been the death of the project had we not come up with that solution. How are we doing on time? 6:45. Okay. This slide is really a montage of different projects, but the one in the upper left-hand corner, that was an automobile dealership, the middle building. There's another building immediately to the left. And we were hired to marry together an existing building, a historic building, and a new building for a specialty surgery center for women that have breast cancer. This is at 1717 St. Charles Avenue. And without going into too much detail, the middle building being an automobile dealership, it really created some significant challenges for us to marry it together. But it's a great example of what different types of buildings can be converted to different uses. The lower left-hand corner is actually the atrium space. These doctors, very good doctors, they had a clientele that was international, and they wanted the hospital to have a spa-like feel to it. So you can kind of get a sense from that particular photograph of a spa-like feel. Any other questions? Hold it right there.
Well, we've gotten some questions here about the ways in which historic tax credits vary from state to state. So because you've done a lot of work, not just in New Orleans, but in many of our neighboring states, maybe you have some thoughts on both the way that the technicalities of different state laws and programs work, and also the people that implement them. How cooperative or not the states might be.
We practice in 26 states currently. And yes, they do vary from state to state. We have an in-house historian. Her name is Shelby Shankle. She continues to run traps for our firm daily because these rules and regulations change on a regular basis. So each state is different, some of them dramatically different. But on that point, part of what our firm also does is we change and we advocate to change laws in different states. In the state of Georgia, when we were first hired to do this large scale project in Savannah, the current legislation at that time had a cap of $300,000 per project. And this is a $350 million project. So after we started, I went to the client and said, we've done this in other states. Would you be interested in hiring me on a success fee to try and change that law? And he said, sure. So we spent a year, and the net result is that 300,000 became 10 million, and it changed the state of Georgia's law, and that spawned many other projects, not just the one in Savannah. And that really was the point. Is yes, it's about Savannah, but there were a number of other projects. I was getting calls from other developers that I didn't know thanking me because they had projects that were right on the line, but by increasing that cap, they were able to do much better and the projects became successful. So again, our firm has a myriad of services that are different.
Yeah, that's a big success. I mean, if people are in New Orleans and they think of the World Trade Center or Charity Hospital as historic tax credit projects, which they are, a $300,000 cap doesn't get you very far on the buildings of that size. So yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, you can make a lot of friends if you put $10 million in their pocket. All right, so having said that and that corny joke, I thought we'd enjoy just a real quick video of our Savannah project. So a few points to make on this particular project. One, it was a game changer for my career and the firm's career. This is an entertainment district. It's not about a hotel. It's branded as a JW, but it's got 14 food and beverage establishments. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, the right bottom side of that photograph, some green space. That's where music venues will happen, where barges will come up and it'll have an amphitheater dock there. The riverfront, those pavilions have food and beverage, oysters and such. Um, it occupies 1,200 lineal feet of riverfront. This particular project, we're into our 7th year. It'll be the 2/3 of it it's open. The last part of it is going to open in sometime in the end of the summer. Another point is this facility is an educational facility. It is meant and will have children of all ages tour it. And the story that is to be told is the origin of power. And so a lot of the architecture and historic artifacts are there for a purpose. It's not just for tax credits, it's also to enhance the educational experience that one has when they stay or tour this particular facility. We know that it's changed the face of Savannah forever in a very good way. In the same manner that I stood in 1983 on Decatur Street when it was boarded up, I did the same thing 6.5 years ago on River Street, which is just behind here, and it was deja vu. It's like, I've seen this picture before, and as soon as this project was announced, properties that were smelly bars and t-shirt shops quickly became upscale food and beverage establishments and retail because of this project. So we're very proud of it. The educational experience, the guest experience, all of those things make this a grand slam. And it's now led to our firm being fortunate to have other riverfront development projects opportunities come to us because just the scale of this, it's getting international attention now. But it's got those view corridors that Mr. Bingler came up with between these buildings. The good news, as you can see through the video, is you get to see the river. And when you're in these rooms in this power plant, those big ships look like they're in your room with you. I mean, it just really is a fantastic experience. But I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And it, of course, makes me think right away of the Market Street Power Station here in New Orleans and that sort of tremendous untapped potential we have, just a couple miles from where I'm sitting right now.
Hold that thought. We would, I understand that it traded. I think Louis Larcella, who was the winner of the Riverfront Development, I think it was him or his group, I think.
Yes, for the convention center has a ambitious plan between the convention center and the plant, the power plant.
Yeah. So, this is a conversion of an old power generation facility into an entertainment district. So you never know.
Do you think that could happen here?
Oh, well, I would love to talk to them. So, hey, you know what? Whether it's Campo or Bingler or whoever else, that is another example of a building that's about to be in a situation where it's demolition by neglect, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how close it is to that, but regardless, it's an impressive structure. And how cool would it be to have some other use, to tie into the riverfront development? So with that, New Orleans has been very good for my business. I'm just fortunate to have started my career here. I couldn't be any more grateful for the people that work for me, that continue to teach me, for a city that, I can remember at the beginning of my career going to interviews. And once I said I was from New Orleans, and if I was interviewing for an adaptive reuse project, oh, well, yeah, well, hell, you're from New Orleans, this stuff, right? It made it a lot easier to win commissions than if I were from another city that wasn't historic as New Orleans. So, it's got a great inventory of buildings yet to be developed, but Campo Architects in New Orleans, we have a give and take relationship, and it's been very good, and I look forward to more of it. So with that, I'm 5 minutes from 7 o'clock, 6:55. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John. This has been great. We'll do a little more dialogue here and take a look at a few more questions. If folks can hang with us just a bit. One of the uh, questions that we have in the Q&A concerns potential changes to the historic tax credit program with the Biden administration. You mentioned your success in Savannah, and we mentioned earlier our kind of joint advocacy, a little bit of our federal delegation, so that they know how impactful the historic tax credit program is already in New Orleans and Louisiana. But do you see any changes coming down the pipe? And how about this? If you could wave a wand and do one thing, what tweak would it be?
Well, what's proposed right now under HTC Go, and you can find this online, is an enhancement from 20% for the federal to 30% with a 5-year burn off. What we're doing is we've certainly been in touch with our Louisiana legislators in DC, but we're getting the message to our clients in Ohio and Texas, Arkansas, that they need to do the same thing, because look, this COVID pandemic hurt. It hurt bad. There were a lot of businesses that aren't coming back. There are a lot of historic buildings out there that they need new life breathed into them. And this 30% incentive, if they can pass that, then I think it's going to give, over that 5-year period, the incentives that are really necessary to get a lot of folks back to work. Because look, right now, it's hard to get a loan. Even with the incentives that we currently have, banks are not really that interested in hotel loans these days. The 30% incentive, I think, is going to make a significant difference in more successful projects. So everybody that's on this podcast, call and email all of our legislators and let your voice be heard, because we need that to get it passed.
And I think also you and I have talked a little about this in the past, but there's definitely an overlap with some of the current administration's other priorities around environmental sustainability and reducing our climate footprint. That when these buildings are rehabbed, hopefully they come back much higher performing from an energy use standpoint, and it takes a lot less raw materials to go into an adaptive reuse project than it does a completely new building.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that. Yeah, the greenest buildings are these that are already existing. I forgot to say this on the Savannah project. We salvaged 575,000 brick, cleaned them, and repurposed them. There were 400-year-old timber pilings that were cut, cleaned, and used for different elements in the building. The steel in the building, some of the catwalks are used, repurposed for handrails and bicycle racks. So I'm glad you brought that up, because these are green buildings inherently, but the fact that we can, there is some selective demolition, but to be able to not have that material go to a landfill and find other uses for it on site, that's something that we're striving for and accomplishing.
Yeah, those are great examples of creative reuse of those materials. And do you find that there are more that reuse projects like that one, which obviously took some labor to clean all those bricks, do they wind up creating, you think, more human intensive projects that just require more man and woman hours in construction versus raw material costs?
Yeah, they do, but it's worth it. Yep.
Yeah, but each of those, those are jobs for people, right, that are working on the projects, I guess was where I was going with that. It's, more money in labor, it means jobs, versus more money in steel and concrete just means raw materials.
Yeah. One thing we didn't mention that we need to, and that is the client. Our clients take a lot of risk. They're as passionate about these projects as we are. They could just as easily go do new construction. And kudos to them, because they are visionaries. They'll take risks, but they also, at the end of the day, once the hotel is open, they reap the benefits, and because of the enhanced profit that these projects provide. But it's not without risk. It takes a special type of courageous client to do these types of projects.
That's great. Yeah, we have a question about how you manage client expectations, given that there are unknowns. You said you always find something once you start construction.
Yes. I I start if it's a new client and we're in the interview phase, I always tell them, listen, we make this look easy, but it's not. You have to have a very high degree of patience. It takes because these are long projects, the approval process, getting through the part one, the part two. Sometimes it's the local historic agency that's giving us fits and they're, not congruent with the SHPO and the NPS folks. So we manage their expectations and I keep repeating that. Um, we also recommend that, not recommend, we insist on them having a significant contingency in their budget, both owner contingency and contractor contingency. Because just like the Troubadour, you didn't think, we didn't think we were going to find anything. And next thing we know, we've got a situation that's 6 figures for fireproofing. So, staying close to them, I think one of the things that helps is in our interview process, we give them examples of here are the uh-ohs that have happened in the past. You can bet they're going to be some on your project. Expect them. We don't know where they're going to be, but as our work gets larger and larger in scale, it's going to happen. So that's how we do it. And I'll tell you, as one of the other things, as a partner in the deal, because we're now, that's the next level of our careers.
Yeah.
We're now into 3 hotel projects. I think within 12 months it'll be 5. But when I'm a partner in the deal, we're having conversations at a different level, and it's easier to manage expectations, quite frankly, when you've got skin in the game than not.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're sharing in the risk.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we have is, are there any specialty consultants typically involved in the process? And I think you referenced some of this earlier. You've got in-house expertise in historic tax credits and also legal expertise on retainer or staff. But yeah, how many consultants does a firm like yours work with? If you've tried to vertically integrate as much as you can and got your designers on staff, but you still must look to some.
Yeah, we do. We can't be all things to all people. One of the most critical ones is a building envelope consultant, one that really, we have a number of groups, but have the ability to go in and assess the exterior skin, do some forensic work because water is our enemy. So in addition to that, a lot of times these projects require acoustic consultants, food and beverage, lighting, a lot of times specialty lighting. But I would say out of all of them, the building envelope consultant, because it's a life safety kind of matter. That's probably the most significant of all of them. Yeah. So it puts a lot of pressure on our project architects and project managers, because it's a lot of people to manage. And I mean, we have some projects where if you really added everybody up, it could be 150 people on a project. Wow. That need to be managed. Look at Savannah. I mean, we're into our 7th year. We've got a $14 million slurry wall on a subterranean part of that project that keeps the Savannah River from backing up into it. Those are there's a specialty consultant.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So someone's also asking, in your experience, is it more difficult for historic projects to be LEED certified? So first I will plug this copy of Preservation in Print about the LEED certified building owned by Historic New Orleans Collection in the Quarter, an article written by my colleague Davis Allen. So if you're interested in that topic, you should pick up a copy of Preservation in Print from April, or you go to our website, prcno.org, and look in the news section. You'll find that article. But John, what's been your experience? Do clients want those certifications, those kind of seals of approval, or do cities require them? And is it complicating?
It's a great question. Most clients don't strive for LEED certification per se, but they absolutely are concerned about the environment and energy efficiency. Having said that, some cities will take advantage. That's wrong way to explain. Some cities will offer incentives. We just finished a project in Cincinnati, and because it's LEED certified, the city allowed a 12-year property tax freeze on that hotel.
Wow.
And it was an easy comparative analysis, the cost of LEED versus the money saved over 12 years in property taxes. So I think it's pretty cool that more cities are utilizing that as an incentive to have it LEED certified. So we're seeing more and more of it where it's tied to an incentive. But back to, are our clients coming to us with, we want LEED certified from the get-go? Not that often. I mean, we're able to do it, we promote it, but they're not that often.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense that if you're the owner of a hotel property, there's probably only one electric meter, right? It's not like being the owner of an apartment building where each, or condo building where each resident unit is billed separately. So therefore they have an incentive to conserve or to purchase efficient appliances. If it's a hospitality project and there's only one person paying the electricity bill,
Yep.
you want to design against that scenario that happens every time people go to the beach, where they fling wide all of the windows and doors facing the beach and leave the air conditioner cranked up. you know.
Well, are you familiar with PACE? Have you ever heard of that?
Uh, yes, so a loan program that is paid back with the energy savings.
Yes, it's another source of revenue that can be used as equity in our equity stack, and it's not requiring the building to be LEED certified, but it has criteria that you have to take the energy efficiencies up to a higher level in order to qualify for the program. So that's another example of an incentive tied to energy efficiency.
All right. We also have a question here about the current function of Jack's Brewery. So hopefully that'll be a little easier one. I'm not sure what's there except that there's retail and restaurant, I'm certain, on the ground floor, correct?
Yes, it's actually been converted to high-end residential condos. So those terraces that we had designed on the riverside are quite exquisite when you marry that up to a high-end residential condo. So I can't remember the name. I get emails occasionally. They've just done this, so they're soliciting folks to purchase them. But high-end residential condos above the ground level.
I bet they have great views of the river.
Yes.
Yeah, not that many places you can do that. Well, John, I mentioned this to you just briefly earlier, but for our audience, I want to let them know a happy coincidence that I discovered as I was researching this, looking at your Campo website, which just has amazing photos of projects you've done all around the country. But one of them is in the old Empire building in Birmingham, Alabama, which is located in what was called the heaviest corner on earth, because there were 4 steel frame structures. Birmingham was a steel smelting town, by 1915, when, high-rise buildings were still fairly novel. And I actually, out of college, worked at a book publishing house across the street from the Empire building. And our
Really?
building was, 80% vacant, and I'm pretty sure it was too, but I could look out at those terracotta figureheads and embellishments and the egg and dart molding and all of that from my office window. So when I saw that you guys had taken on that project, I thought, wow, what a what a full circle moment, and how cool that now that's a hotel I could go stay in the building.
Yeah,
I'm in town.
that is an award winner. That is called the Ellington, which was the name of the city of Birmingham when it was first a city. We've designed 3 hotels on that side of the street. Across the street, we're currently working on the Brown Marks building, which is it's I think 250,000 square feet or so. That's going to be a dual branded hotel. So that would make 4 hotels in downtown Birmingham that we've been there, I guess, about 8 years now. But that's a city that is really, it's become a culinary city, amongst many other things, and it's thriving. the downtown area, which I remember when we first started, it was kind of like nobody showing up. It's
Yeah,
becoming more revitalized.
it was certainly a no man's land after five when I was in my early 20s.
Yep.
People would go out to eat at lunch downtown, but yeah, the really nice restaurants like Frank Stitz were all sort of out from the downtown. And then the baseball stadium, I've been gone from Birmingham for 18 years now maybe, but the baseball stadium really was catalytic. And so there's another idea for something that we could bring to the New Orleans riverfront down there by Market Street Power Plant.
There you go.
Copy Louisville and some others that have Pittsburgh, great baseball stadiums on the water. But I don't know. That's just an idea out there for someone with millions of dollars if they're listening. But we haven't been able to sustain a baseball team, so I don't know if that may not be the right city for that.
No, you never know. One thing that these projects, as our careers evolve, we find that we're not just adaptive. We're not just doing a building for adaptive reuse. We're changing the dynamics of cities now. And, it took me a while to realize it, but as more of these projects come about, that responsibility word, right, keeps coming up in my head, and recognizing that, no, it's not just about the building, it's about the entire city and how this work affects a positive change in their economic environment. And so we're blessed with those type of projects. And I think that's another direction that we're going to continue to go.
Yeah, that example from Savannah is a great model for that. But then when you aggregate together those 17 projects in New Orleans, it is, instead of one district, they're scattered around pre-existing historic districts. But yeah, no one can doubt that, the impact on our city has been tremendous to have the proficiency in using historic tax credits and then also have the market for hospitality. So I've got one last question to kind of close with, or at least unless we don't get another one from the audience. Hospitality is obviously a dynamic industry to be in, and one of the biggest changes that we've seen is the rise of short-term rentals, right? Mm-hmm. So as someone who yourself owns an interest in hotels and then works for others and with others who own an interest in hotels, how do you see the changes being brought on by the growth in short-term rentals? I think a lot of people in New Orleans feel like they would like people to be staying in hotels instead of in their neighborhoods sometimes. Well, but how do you perceive that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that either. They certainly didn't belong in the Vucare. We are getting into the short-term rental business. It pairs up well, particularly if we have a project in Kansas City where it's a high-rise historic building, but when we bought the real estate, it came with a 5-story building adjacent to it. And I think the direction we're going there is the hotel and the short-term rental, because all of the needs of the short-term rental, from housekeeping to clean the room to if there's a toilet stuck, then the engineer in the hotel can go in and fix it. But more importantly, short-term rentals have quickly eaten into the hospitality world. Not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, during the pandemic, short-term rentals financially did much better than hotels. People felt more comfortable in short-term rentals. I like the idea because they create a different design opportunity. A more, there's some real creative stuff you can do in short-term rentals that you're not going to be able to do in hotels. So I like the building type for that reason also. Is it's another story to tell. It's another way to take a historic building and still have that contrast of sleek and grit, but the guest experience there, they're going to pay more, I think, for short-term rentals in those type of settings than new construction. But I've embraced it. I like the business, and those in the hotel business that continue to turn a deaf ear to it. It won't be much longer. They're going to have to compete, and I think coexist.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's some kind of larger market transitions happening that, at the city scale, you can't just say, hey, the global economy is not happening, or, consumer preferences aren't what they are. You have to figure out how to manage that change in consumer preferences in a way that is good for the city and the cityscape. So that's a real interesting point about the different building scales and typologies that work for that sector and how that creates opportunities.
Yeah, they can coexist.
Yeah, designing suites with more rooms, and kitchens and baths and all the stuff that people expect from an STR. Right. Well, John, I really, really appreciate the time you've given us tonight and the thoughtfulness that you put into your presentation. I want to thank everybody on your team behind the scenes who helped make that happen and whose work you were showcasing alongside yours. And I want to thank everybody on our team, again, Daniil and Laurel, and all my colleagues at Preservation Resource Center. This is the third now in an ongoing series we're doing throughout the rest of May, Preservation Month. It's going to culminate in a roundtable discussion with our guest architects and some others on May 25th. So I hope people will make it back for that conversation and catch some of the other ones between now and then. And any that you've missed, you can watch on PRC's YouTube channel or go to prcno.org. And you'll find an archive there with links. So we'll be sharing this out again in that format for more people to enjoy and learn. And just thank you so much, John, for being a part of it. It's been really
Thank you.
pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, this has been very enjoyable. I appreciate the opportunity.
Glad to do it. All right, everyone, have a great evening.